He is the sports columnist for the Bucks County Courier Times, covering the Philadelphia 76ers. We welcome Tom Moore onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Tom?
All right, how are you guys doing?
Really, really good. Thanks for joining the show, and we've been looking forward to this interview because you specialize in covering the Sixers, and wanted us to pick your brain just about this team. It seems like they've been through such a process the last few years, and this year seems to be the culmination of that. Right now, they're 28 and 13 at the top of the Eastern Conference. And just kind of a general question: what do you make of the Sixers this season? They're planning a pandemic. I think as fans know, the Philadelphia fans can be harsh. They're fairly passionate, but yet this season the Sixers are atop, the NBA, but there's not that those fans there. Can you kind of just walk us through what the reception is for the team is there? Them being just like an NBA power, but yet the fans can't enjoy it inside the arena.
Well, the interesting thing is, guys, is that the game presentation hasn't changed. So they were playing everything at ear-splitting volume and doing all the stuff. And Dwight Howard is, you know, encouraging the fans, even though there were no fans there, only Sixers employees and like 35 media members, was all that was there until I guess last Sunday against the Spurs. So it's similar in some ways, but still different. Now with the fans there, they make the 3,100 do make a lot of noise when there's been no cheering and it's only been piped in and it's real. I noticed like I guess it was the overtime win Wednesday night. I was down there and overtime loss to the Bucks. I'm sorry. Yes. It was really interesting. We kind of reminded you of what it was like, even though there were only, seats every couple rows and, socially distanced and all that stuff. I think they got off to a really good start, which I think the fans really appreciated, with a new coach, new system, two new starters. I think fans weren't sure. The schedule was fairly favorable. They had one of the easier schedules one of the five easiest schedules in the NBA in the first half. And I think they took advantage of that. They beat mostly teams they should beat. They won at home, primarily struggled a little bit on the road. But yeah, now they're, tied with the Nets, kind of heading into the stretch here. And with all of the Bucks are only a game and a half back too. So, and it looks like a 3-team race, although you never count out. You never know with the Miami Heat and the Celtics if they get their acts together too. They could be factors too in the East. So, yeah, I think fans want something to happen by the trade deadline. I'm just not convinced necessarily that it will, unless it's a fairly reasonable price tag. And I don't think Daryl Morey wants to part with young guys, sacrifice the future, Matisse Thybulle, maybe Maxey. It'd be interesting to see if they could get a difference maker if he'd be willing to part with one or both of those.
Can you talk about the progression of Joel Embiid? Right now, he's out with an injury, unfortunately, but he's been really just dominating the league this season. And I think finally being able to see his potential has been awesome. What's your opinion of him? And then with his injury being out, what is Ben Simmons' role going to be on this team? Do you think he needs to assert more of a scoring position on this team, or do you think things should just stay the status quo while Embiid works his way back into the lineup?
I think Justin, first with Embiid, I think Doc Rivers is using him differently, and I think instead of just posting him up or playing him at one spot, if you notice, sometimes he'll get the ball in the low post, sometimes he'll get it mid range, sometimes he'll get at the top of the key, sometimes he'll even get the ball at the 3-point line, and his shooting has been much better. He's got career highs across the board. I think the only one he doesn't have career highs in is offensive rebounds, but everything else, his field goal percentage, his 3-point percentage, his scoring, he really is just making those mid-range shots, at a very high level. As far as Simmons, I do think he needs to attack more consistently, with Embiid out. For instance, the fourth quarter the other night with the Sixers, having played the night before, won a close game with the Knicks. Tobias Harris, a lot of the shots were short. You could tell that he didn't have the legs. I think that would be a time for him to attack the rim and get to the basket. I know he's not shooting 3-pointers or mid-range shots, but, with his quickness and size and being such a matchup problem, I think he can get to the rim just about seemingly whenever he wants. So I think he needs to be more aggressive, and then he needs to stay aggressive when Embiid comes back. Just probably wouldn't have as many shots. That's all.
Tom, with relation to maybe the development or maybe just the motivation to Joel Embiid, how much of this season would you credit to perhaps a culture change or just the change in coaching staff and front office? It's always tough because this is a younger team and players develop on their own, of course, each year. But how impactful has the change in coaching and front office been on this team season?
Yeah, I know. I think that it really has made a difference. I think Doc Rivers, the players all know he won a championship, with the Celtics. He's had winning teams, 50-win teams, some 60-win teams, with the Clippers, was successful before Boston, with Orlando. So I think he has some cachet. And, Daryl Morey traded for James Harden, with the Rockets. Didn't win a championship, made the conference finals. But I think they both have track records, and I think the players know that. And I think when you have cachet, and I think, Embiid's realizing that he's, 26, 27, but, you really don't know how long the window is going to be open. Had they traded for Harden, I think it would have been 2 or 3 years. That would have meant you got to win it or else. Now, theoretically, it'll be longer, but you need to have the right people around. They seem to have really good chemistry and like each other this year. It's just a question of, do they have enough, in a 7-game series in the second round, they're going to end up playing either the Bucks or the Nets or the Celtics or the Heat, probably one of those teams. And, to win a 7-game series, you have to be the better team because there's no surprises. You have to just have better players, more reactive players, and so on. So, I think getting back to what you were asking, Matt. Yeah, I think it's made a big, big difference because Brett Brown was kind of learning as he went. Elton Brand was learning as he went along. He went all in to get Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. It didn't work out with Butler, not necessarily on the court, but more. I think they were worried about him. His honesty, shall we say, being a problem going forward with the coaches and teammates and splitting things apart. So, here they are, and, they have a shot this year. I don't know that they're quite ready yet. I just don't know if they quite have enough in a 7-game series. I still think they need maybe a veteran backup point guard to help, Shake Milton on the second unit and possibly a backup stretch 4. I don't know that Daryl Morey is going to be able to get them. Maybe if he doesn't get them by the deadline, maybe he could, pick one of them up in the buyout market, coming afterward, where that wouldn't cost you anything in a trade. So, yeah, it should be very interesting final 2 months, a little under 2 months here.
Absolutely. Of all the configurations of this roster that we've seen under the kind of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons era of this team, of course, the Raptors, Kawhi had that dagger in Game 7. That was a team that seemed very ready, one of the best iterations of that team. How would you compare this team to that team? Do you think this team is more prepared to be competitive in the playoffs than that team?
I think this team might be a little better defensively than that team. But that team, that was Jimmy Butler. So you had a closer, with him and Embiid. But the problem was, Simmons really didn't have a role down the stretch of games because if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, to some degree they were playing 4-on-5 offensively. And so you don't like to do that. He doesn't shoot the ball, from deep, so teams can, sag off of him. Now they had JJ Redick, who was, terrific on the offensive end and worked really well with Embiid, but at the defensive end, was exploited, quite a bit. The Nets, who in that series before the Raptors, when they switched, whoever Redick ended up on, whether it was LeVert or, Dinwiddie or whoever, would just take him. And that's what the playoffs are, is, finding your advantage and taking advantage of, taking advantage of it. So I think, like I said, I think defensive this team might be a little better, but offensively, the jury's still out. Can Tobias Harris be a closer? Can he be the second guy at the end of games? He's hit some big shots this year in the regular season. Can he do it in a playoff series? With 2-2 game 5 in the Eastern Conference semifinals, and we don't know, and that we'll find out this year.
Tom, I wanted to talk to you about Ben Simmons and his progression as a player. Opinions vary in terms of what his potential is, what his ceiling is as a star in the league. From most experts, they have stated, talking to us, that he strengthens defensively, but just the shooting is not going to come around. But then we see from like national columnists that he has the potential to be a LeBron James type of player. Can you just take us into the inside of what he's feeling as just a player himself, what his expectations as himself, his role on the 76ers?
Yeah, I mean, he's been a 3-time All-Star, didn't get to play this year, obviously, with Embiid because of the being around the barber and the contact tracing, and then had to miss, I guess, the first 2 games when they came back. Yeah, it's interesting because Doc Rivers doesn't. He's been asked about Simmons not shooting jumpers or 3-pointers, and he says he doesn't really care. It doesn't matter to him. Now, publicly, that's what he says. I would think privately they're trying to encourage him, to shoot that more. To me, especially like that 12, 15-footer, if that's available, that's such a good shot. And it would help with the spacing, too, because in the playoffs, like the way the Celtics would cover him, they put a big guy on him and just back in the lane and just clog everything up. But I mean, I think, defensively, his ability to defend all the different positions. I mean, like the Nets, like you probably put him on Durant if Durant's healthy, but then who guards Harden? You'd probably have to put Danny Green. And I think, honestly, Danny Green's a little underrated. I think people are like, I'll trade him for Kyle Lowry, trade him for whatever. But if you would trade him and you get Lowry, you're going to need a starter at that spot. And I mean, maybe it could be Matisse Thybulle, but offensively, putting Thybulle and Simmons on the court together is not ideal, because you really almost need 4 shooters out there, with Simmons for the spacing in the half-court offense. And I think Green's really good at that baseline 3, and I think he's a good defender, and he does a lot of little things, and he doesn't have to have the ball. If you bring in another guy who's ball dominant, or wants the ball, Embiid's going to get less touches. Simmons going to get less touches. Sometimes, chemistry and all that stuff can be kind of, it can be a little fickle. It can come and go if you don't have the right mix, of people. But yeah, Simmons, I mean, he clearly has progressed. He's been getting to the rim, better and more consistently, which was certainly, encouraging. I think it was the Utah game with Embiid out earlier this year where he had 42 and everything was within 6 feet. I mean, if you can get it, that's just fantastic.
Tom, you alluded to this earlier in, not being entirely certain of what the Sixers may want to do at the break. Daryl Morey, typically fairly active GM, that may be an understatement. I certainly, full disclosure, I'm a Rockets fan. I certainly miss him in Houston. What is your sense of who is most likely to be moved? And you mentioned like a veteran point guard being a big need for this team. Do you see any potential options out there for the Sixers if you had to guess?
Well, guys like George Hill from the Thunder, who had been, played for the Spurs and has played for some other teams. Led the league in 3-point shooting last season, isn't shooting the 3 quite as well this year, but, runs the offense, averages like 4 assists per turnover, which is excellent. 2.5 to 1 is regarded as very good. Now, I don't know what it's going to take. The Thunder are not a very good team. I don't know what they would want necessarily, if they'd be willing to take, Mike Scott, for example, and, another player in a draft pick. I don't know. I mean, I got the sense that Morey was, more, I don't know what the word is. I won't say aggressive, but more optimistic. I'm just getting the feeling that maybe the price tags have been too high, and he doesn't want to overpay and go all in necessarily. I think if he gets something that would make the team better without kind of disrupting the rotation, I think he would do it. They do have that $8.2 million trade exception. So some guys, if they make less than 8.2, you could trade just the exception and a draft pick for a player, and then they'd have to waive somebody. Probably Vincent Poirier would be the likely, in the last year of a contract, who doesn't play to fit on the 15-man, roster. I think he's looking to do something, but I don't think he's desperate, and I don't think he thinks, well, the Bucks just got PJ Tucker, and look at the Nets. They added Blake Griffin, who I'm still not sure is a great fit because he's not a 3-point shooter and he doesn't attack the rim like he used to. I'm just not sure how much of a difference he makes unless they're going to make him a small ball 5 guy, which maybe that's what they're doing. I'm not sure. But I don't know here that really he would have been much of an upgrade over Mike Scott, to be honest with you. So I think his eyes are open. I think he's considering everything. But I get the sense that he's not determined, I have to do something here. I think the fans would like him to. But I think if he doesn't, that just tells you that he couldn't make a deal that he was happy with, that he didn't think, and that wasn't wouldn't have taken him overpaying for what he was getting.
Tom, I wanted to ask you, as a journalist, what has it been like covering the NBA during the pandemic? And what are things that you're seeing now in terms of coverage that once things go back to normal, you might want to prefer staying around in terms of media access, or do you think things should just go back to normal once everything is lifted?
Yeah, we get pretty much no access. Pregame is just the coach. 7:00 game, Rivers would talk at 5:15. That's a home game, and then the visiting coach talks at 5:30. All Zoom calls. Then after the game, Rivers talks about 10 minutes after the game, and then players. But you're totally at their mercy. You can request, but if they say they don't want to talk or whatever, you can't. It's difficult not to everybody to write the same thing. There's a lot of pack journalism, and there's almost no choice in the matter because you just don't have access. Now, I was able to, I guess it was 3 weeks ago, arrange something where I got Doc Rivers to call me, and I talked to him about how he's using Tobias Harris differently and Joel Embiid to get the most out of them. Something like that. That was different, and that was something that wasn't in, you can ask a question and a follow-up on a Zoom call, but I had like 10 questions. I think it wasn't that long. It might've been 11 minutes. It wasn't a super long conversation, but it was enough where I was able to get specific things. And I thought it was interesting. He said when he watched film of Harris from last year, he noticed he was going right a lot. And with the Clippers, thought that Harris preferred driving left. So he called him up and said, "What's the deal?" And Harris said, "Well, I can go either way." And Doc said baloney, except he didn't say baloney, if you know what I mean. And he said, and then Harris responded, "You think I prefer going left?" And Rivers said, "I know you prefer going left." And he said, "Why wouldn't you say something to Brett Brown about that?" Because he kept running plays where he would be going to his right. And Harris said that he didn't want to rock the boat, and he just had plays called for him, and he would run them. So first thing I was surprised is that the Sixers staff didn't realize from film the year before in that first 55 games when Harris had played so well with the Clippers that he preferred going left. And secondly, I was surprised that he wouldn't say anything to Brown, because if you notice now, he's on the right wing a lot, and he goes to the middle a lot, which is with his left hand. I honestly hadn't realized that he liked to go left as much, because he hadn't really done it with the Sixers until this year. So that was just something a little bit. And also, how you call plays, what Rivers is good at sticking with plays. If a play works, like earlier this year, they ran the same play 6 times and they scored 6 times at the end of the game. And he said, human nature is that you want to do something different, but it's like, well, they didn't stop us, so why would we stop running it? But anyway, you kind of have to work. You can't do that all the time. It's difficult. It's difficult to arrange things like that. But that's the thing I missed. locker room access before the game where you could grab a guy. Harris would talk before games and get some stuff maybe that they're not in a rush to get out of there after a game. So most of our seats are better. I like our seats better where they are now than before. They're higher up, but they're on the side court as opposed to behind the basket. So I like that better. But everything else, I would wish it would go back to the way it was beforehand.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the insight. Can you please let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you on social media and where they can find also your just articles and insight on the 76ers?
Sure. On Twitter, I'm at Tom Moore Philly. That's Moore. Philly, Philly. And I usually link my stories. I'll tweet out links, 3 or 4 or 5 times there. And if not, you can go to buckscountycouriertimes.com/sports and access my content there too.
Awesome, Tom.
Thank you so much for your time, Tom.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Justin and Matt. Anytime.